Senator, always good to see you. Thank you for being here tonight. How much credibility do you give this emerging story?
Well, I think this one worth paying attention to. It would be a dramatic, earth-shattering revelation if, in fact, it turns out to be the case. And that would be the case for two reasons. Number one is one thing that someone became infected at a lab and they infected some other people. That's concerning that the safety standards there are not high. But another thing completely is that a government, when they learn of it, would actively attempt to cover it up, as they have, if that's the case. You know, from the very beginning of this crisis, the Chinese have been less than transparent. And, you know, if something like that happened in the United States, there would be, because we are an open society and a democracy, there would be almost immediate accountability and a revelation about it at some point. And there would be a big price to pay for covering something like that up, both legally and politically. So I think it'll be a tremendous global scandal, one of the most outrageous things that has happened in the modern history of the world, if that were to turn out to be true.
So what's the next step? I mean, you know, I think we talk so much about holding China accountable. The president was pretty forceful on this in a very sort of subtle way. If you can do both of those things at once, he said, people should have told us. People should have told us. He said that several times. And that's a pretty, I think, pretty clear message that he is not liking what he's hearing about this.
You know, it's reminiscent somewhat of Chernobyl, which was obviously that accident a while back. And ironically, they had that big series here recently about it and the way the Soviet government reacted to that. And so if this turns out to be the case, it's very reminiscent of that. You're already seeing some people in Africa and in poorer countries saying that China should be contributing to some sort of global fund to help pay reparations for what they have gone through. But I think there'll be some tough conversations throughout the world about what needs to be done in regards to this. But I think no matter what, at this point, no matter what you may be reading in some of the articles out there by some of these people who think they know it all, here's the truth. China's reputation globally has already been badly damaged. There are plenty of countries out there that know exactly how China mishandled this, irrespective of whether this came out of that lab or not. They're not out there talking about it because their economies are not big enough to take China on directly. But the damage that China has suffered to its perception around the world is in many ways irreparable.
So I guess the question becomes, you know, we hear a lot of outrage. We hear people say that they don't like the fact that all of our antibiotics, most of them are made in China, that we need to, I know you've worked on this, to bring back the production of these drugs at home. And I think the American people kind of want to know when they're going to see all that actually happen, because we hear the president talk about the trade deal and how important the trade deal is and that he wants to keep that going. I mean, how can we have a relationship with this country if this is true?
Yeah. You know, over a year ago, I released a report from the Small Business Committee called Made in China 2025 and the Plan to Reinvigorate America's Industry. And the basic premise of it was there are some things that even if they are cheaper to make somewhere else, we have to be able to make in our own country for our own security. I mean, thank God for the American farmer. Thank God we didn't outsource that. And I think you're seeing some of those things exposed now, from little swabs, nasal swabs that we need for the tests, the personal protective equipment, to the components that go into a ventilator. And then you keep going all the way to rare earth minerals, which are critical for almost all of high tech. The world is overly dependent on China and our supply chain. And yes, it's cheaper to do those things over there, but we cannot afford, from an economic and national security standpoint, to not have the industrial capacity to do things, not to mention the jobs that come with it. So that's something we should have been looking at already. I think this crisis will only accelerate it.
I think you got a lot of agreement on that. If it turns out that they sat on this for 6 days, didn't tell anyone, held a huge international festival, knowing this in Wuhan, and then let people fly all over the world afterwards, that, as you say, is going to be an international scandal of epic proportion when you look at what has happened to so many people around this world and still happening in some of the developing nations in a way that's going to be very, very difficult for them. Senator Rubio, thank you. Always good to see you tonight.
Thank you. Stay safe.